Hi there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from the quiet of today's Philanthropy Mastermind series episode. We will have our music back next time, so I hope that silence isn't putting you off. I think that some people think silence is golden. I just think it's silence. Not a bad thing, but it's certainly a strange way to get started. But we are very happy to welcome you to this session. And maybe that silence is almost meditative, which might be a good place for us to begin our conversation today, which I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment. But first, I wanted to welcome you here. It's, of course, the Philanthropy Mastermind series. My name is Jay Frost. And this is, I think, episode number 605. So we are really moving this year. Thanks to all of you who show up here and enjoy the recordings afterwards. For those who are here with us live, of course, I want to welcome you to participate in this conversation. Now, because of the nature of it, you may or may not want to do that anonymously, which is fine. But the chat is a great place to play. So if you would let us know at least that you're here, maybe which part of the country or the world you're from, and maybe if you're at an organization, you wish to say where it is, let us know that as well. That would be very helpful to our guest, who I'll be introducing to you in a moment. So please just go over to the chat and say hello. We'd really love that. And then while you're doing that, I also want to encourage you to utilize the chat throughout, but also the Q&A. The Q&A is a great place to post questions. If you don't want to say something in a public way, we'll be answering those questions as well, and we can handle all those anonymously. Why be sensitive to that issue? Because today we're going to be talking, of course, about addressing burnout, which is a personal issue, not only for all of us, but it is also for our guest, who I'll be, again, introducing to you in a moment. It's the topic, of course, is addressing burnout, a leader's insights on self-care in the sector. And for that conversation, once again, we really want you to be a part of it. So please do utilize either the chat or the Q&A throughout. I also want to give a shout out to our sponsor for this entire series, DonorSearch. So unless our guest chooses to mention them for some reason today, we won't be talking about DonorSearch, but you can learn a lot more about them and your donors, which are so important to our work, over at the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net. They have lots of things to help you understand the breadth and width of your donor pool, but also the individuals within it, what they care about, what matters to them. So as we get in touch with ourselves, we can also get in touch with their needs and interests. All of that's available to you through DonorSearch. And not coincidentally, under the resources tab, you'll find recordings of sessions like today's from the past couple of years anyway, as well as on their YouTube channel. So do look for all that later. You'll also find, as we conclude today, that an email will come to you if you're joining us live, and that will have a link to that recording. Now, I want to make sure that I'm acknowledging some of the people who have started to join us. So thank you, Julie and Liz, Dylan, Kyra, and others who are saying hello from around the country. We really do appreciate you. I like to see all those Californias here in the room. We are going to be going to California for sessions at AHP very soon. So I hope you'll join us for those. More information on that later. But right now, I want to welcome, of course, our guest today, and that's Cassie Gruenstein. And Cassie, of course, is the founder of Plus Impact Partners, but there is so much more than a title behind Cassie's work. And she's going to be giving us kind of a mini portrait on what she has personally experienced as a leader who then experienced some level of burnout and wanted to find a way to not only develop strategies for reemerging from that and becoming stronger, but also to share that with others like she's so kind to do today. So Cassie, thank you very much for being here and sharing today.
Shay, thank you so much for having me. And I'm also excited to see everyone in the chat. Just so folks know, um, I love doing things in person. I'm so happy that we're all here on Zoom, but it makes me happy to know that people are participating in the conversation. So I really wanted to echo what Jay, you were saying, where like say hi, ask questions. It's not about a perfect presentation, it's about the conversation. I am going to spend the next 5 or 10 minutes just talking, but I want to invite people to participate too at different times. And then Jay and I will have a conversation, we'll answer questions. So let's make it as interactive as possible. And I'm thrilled to see that people are here from South Dakota, North Carolina, where there's been a lot going on, Maine, all across the country, like you said, Jay. So I'm really honored to be here. And I will just say thanks to DonorSearch for doing this. 600 plus episodes is a lot. That is a lot to give back to the fundraising community. It's huge. And as a development director for 10 years in my past, I want to say thank you. We could just start off and say that. I think it's important to recognize all of you out there who are in development know it's important to recognize your sponsors at every event. It is. It's really helpful. It's what we're all about. So I wanted to start off today. So I'm going to just share some slides I put together in preparing for this. It helps me think about, what is it I'm talking about? And there's a lot of really interesting work out there around burnout. So I just want to say that I'm an expert in some ways, but I join a community of experts. Many of you may be also experts in mental health and burnout. So you are part of this community. And I really think the power of this opportunity is not only to share my story, but also to share some of the resourcing that's out there, other folks who are working really hard in this space who preceded me, and all the people who will come to join the space afterwards too. So, um, hello to all of you. A little bit about me as a background. So as Jay mentioned, I run a consultancy serving nonprofits and philanthropies and sometimes companies and their impact programs. I do program design, leadership development, strategy. I love doing user experience. And I've done that on and off for the last 15 years. Before that, and as part of that too, I was a development director for a small community organization. So understand if you are in a development role, really what we're going through. And I just want to also say thank you to all of you for joining us at the end of October for this. You may be feeling burnout right now. I know what it is like to be at your year-end crunch. So hopefully you're taking the next hour and being calm in your space and appreciating your time here. It's a lot to invest, and I recognize that. And then most recently, I am now a yoga instructor. This is something that I have been practicing for 20 years. In the last couple years, following a burnout in early 2022, I became a yoga teacher, and it's been a really helpful add-on to the work that I do in community. So I just want to start by giving a bigger picture context, which is if you are feeling burnout in this moment, you are really not alone. And shockingly, I think, although maybe it's not shocking, but I don't know what it is, but this is not a blip, this number. And a lot of people have been talking about this in community when I go out and look around at what the conversation is. But the Center for Effective Philanthropy, their State of Nonprofits report in 2024 said 95% of leaders say burnout of staff and themselves is a top concern. And just to give you a sense of how that compares to other sectors, the Social Impact Staff Retention Project says that overall 65% of workers across sectors are considering a job change. So it's a pretty big difference between burnout concerns in the sector and overall. Um, and I think we're going to start with like a really big picture context, which I think is important of where does burnout come from? And I want to start by inviting people to contribute in the chat too. This quote by Henry Ford, great industrialist, some say, of the early 20th century. And listen, I have to tell you, it is not hard to find Ford quotes online that talk about work and productivity. They are all out there. And if you want to contribute to the chat, just share like a one or two word about how this quote might make you feel. And while you're doing that, I'll share how it makes me feel. In one sense, it makes me feel proud. And I am proud of the hard work that I have done. My work ethic is really high. I've been in the sector for a long time. I consider myself to be a service leader. And at the same time, I feel really indignant by this quote and disappointed. And like it's just patently untrue. I think even before we were a nation, there were a lot of people, enslaved people, indentured workers who were coming to this space who were working really hard and know how to work and who suffered a lot. And I think that is something that continues, unfortunately, like through the industrialization of our nature, of our nation, and of the world too. So, where does this come from? This wonderful book, Do Nothing by Celeste Headley, she talks about how in the last 500 years, starting in 1517 with the Reformation and with Martin Luther and his conversation about the Protestant work ethic, that it was seen as a virtue and was taken, this virtue in society over the last several hundred years, and really turned into this productivity culture and perfectionism culture. And I just want to read what Wikipedia says about it. So Max Weber talks about and coined the Protestant work ethic in the spirit of capitalism in the early 20th century. And he said that Protestant ethics and values enabled the rise and spread of capitalism. Just as priests and caring professionals are deemed to have a vocation for their work according to the Protestant work ethic, the lowly workman also has a noble vocation, which he can fulfill through dedication to his work. So this has become like a really core value and ethos for us, and I'm sure we all feel this too. So productivity culture, unfortunately, can lead to burnout in a couple of different ways. And what is burnout? So in 1975, Herbert Freudenberger defined burnout as three different things: emotional exhaustion, so the fatigue that comes from carrying too much for too long; a decreased sense of accomplishment, so a sense of futility, like nothing I will do will ever make a difference. And I just want to, plus one here and say that there's a fair amount of grief I know that I feel and pain that a lot of people may feel, especially in our sector where we see a lot of the work that we have been working on being fought against and work that's happened for the last few decades. And so the sense of futility might be something that you feel in your own life. It might be something you feel in your job, but it also is something that I think a lot of us are feeling societally. I know that that's been a heavy weight on me. And I say this 2 weeks before a rough election takes place. Like, this has been a rough season. I opened up the paper this morning and I was like, again, I have to hear about this again. Anyway, could talk about this for a long time. I will move us along and just say that the last component of burnout is depersonalization, and that's this depletion of empathy, compassion. You might feel numb, you might feel like I don't care. Um, and I just want to say I was speaking with a head of people who's a friend of mine. She works at Free Will, which is an organization you may know too. And she relates burnout to less the hours being worked. That might be some people, but and like a lot of EDs, I think, who are on this too. But a lot of people, it's caused by a lack of motivation, which can come about by having a lack of agency or a lack of engagement at what's going on. Something is not working for you. And we'll talk about that again when we look at solutions. So Beth Cantor, who is a wonderful leader in the space too, she wrote the Happy Healthy Nonprofit. She talks about and acknowledges how the CDC and WHO classify it as an occupational phenomenon, and therefore it is something that our organizations are responsible. So I just wanted to say that early on. We're going to talk both about how individuals can address their own burnout, but it's also has to be coupled with the community that we're in, the organizations that we're in. And Beth has a really good framework and some workshops that she does in partnership with her clients about how to create the processes that help prevent burnout and protect our mental health in the workplace, which is luckily becoming an issue that's getting more and more attention. I'm seeing it in the funding space getting more and more attention. And it makes sense as to why, because burnout itself is an occupational issue, but it causes stress. It's like ongoing chronic stress. And we all know that breaking the stress cycle is really important. And actually, the authors of Burnout, which is a wonderful book, Emily and Amelia Nagoski, said there are several ways we can get out of a stress cycle. And, what gets us into a stress cycle to begin with, one of the things, and this really spoke to me, is if your stress level outpaces the resources you have to drain off the stress, it will keep accumulating. So it's a little bit discouraging, but it helps us understand like, oh, I can't just pretend the stress will go away and it will deplete. It's a continuous sort of like add-on thing. Okay, great. So this is all very low. We're at a low moment in understanding Burma. We're at a low moment in understanding sort of my own history. This is where I come in. And you might be saying this right now. That's not really me. I will feel better, or I can handle it. I think this is something I know that I have said to myself. I can handle this. This is the same as before. It's not any different. So this is me in 2021, looking really happy, looking really healthy, and I am handling it, sort of. Not at all. I had spent the last couple of years at my desk on Zoom calls, leading programs, talking to a lot of people out there in the ether, isolated at my house, like a lot of people post-pandemic, and I was not okay at all. And that started showing up in a lot of the ways that we saw on the burnout slide earlier. I was tired. I would, when I was done with my workday, like move from my desk to my couch and like cuddle under the covers and watch television for hours on at a time without trying to think about anything. I was really prone to anger that was coming out more and more. Where I was feeling like I had to leave meetings and just go step away and be really angry. I think that's a real defense mechanism. Unfortunately, you don't want it to show up in your interactions with your coworkers or really anyone that you have a relationship in your life. It's okay to be angry. It is not okay to be chronically angry, I think. And that was something that I really needed to think about too. So, what did I do at the time? And I wish I had had all of these resources to think about early on. So, it's a gift to be able to talk about it with all of you too. But I tried three things. So, I tried with my boss to put into place some more boundaries at work. We had some things in our culture, even though we wanted to put in place some boundaries that really respected work life balance. We were very bad. And I'll say that as a member of the leadership team who at the time was feeling very perfectionist and really contributed to this, and this was unfortunate, would blow past our boundaries. So we would say we wanted to do it, and then we wouldn't stick to it, which was really rough. And we saw that, we heard that from the folks. I heard it from the people who reported to me. There were some real power and justice issues that came up and all of that. It was a bad thing. So I tried to put boundaries into place. Didn't really work very well. I tried to take time off. I took 3 weeks within the space that we had in my job's benefits to take that time off. I negotiated that with my boss, with my team. And that was great, but I came back and the issue was still there. And so I eventually left my job in the fall of 2021, decided to take a sabbatical, which for me meant something that I had done in 2010 when I left a job as a development director. And I watched this great TED talk with this designer, Stefan Sagmeister, where he talked about the power of taking a period of rest and actually dedicating this opportunity to rest, recharge, get your creative energy back, and then to come back to work after a period of 6 to 12 months, and I had done that in 2010, and it was, tremendously valuable to me after resting, doing a fair amount of yoga at the time, doing a passion project about sustainable food. I came back to work, I started my consulting practice, made a dedication to spend more time with nieces and nephews and family close by, and I decided to go to business school, and I did all 3 of those things. So I was really overdue for another big break in my own philosophy, and that is what I did. And I came back to work in 2023, coming back to my consulting practice. I did feel better. I do feel better now. And the time off that I took and the slowness with which I moved, I will tell you in my brain, I did not know how to do this all. In my brain, it was really agonizing. It was very hard. I think I'm so acculturated to do this, to not work. It's really deeply within our psyches. And so I've been, and I'm still on this path to really constantly redefine what does work mean for me? Where does somatically my body um, knowledge fit into this? And how will that balance moving forward so that I avoid the burnout that I felt? I just want to take a note here, and we can talk more about this in our conversation too. But it really is true that impact leaders and people who are in helping professions feel burnout really deeply. And I'd like to read something. This is not my words. I think this is really important um, to talk about. Let me find this. This an excerpt from a really wonderful document I found, Sabbaticals for BIPOC Leaders, created by a group of BIPOC leaders who see this as a real social justice issue, and they really should. And this is something Trisha Hersey, if you know her, she talks about rest as resistance. She has also been a really foundational leader for me in my thinking about transforming how I think of work versus rest. And this excerpt says, wellness is foundational to sustainable change making. And then they specifically talk about this, and I do think this is super important, that BIPOC communities, BIPOC-led nonprofits, and BIPOC leaders have always had to fill in the gaping holes left by harmful systems. We are the same people who carry the medicine needed to realize a society that centers wellness and restoration. Now more than ever, we are deeply in need of rest and renewal. We must have the collective vision to support the humanity, health, and whole selves of BIPOC leaders. We must recognize that wellness and self-care for BIPOC nonprofit executive directors is foundational to racial healing and social justice in communities. So I just wanted to leave that here as something that, all of us BIPOC leaders, white leaders really need to pay attention to, is that in this space, not only do we as social sector leaders feel burnout really deeply, but those of us who are not white are feeling it and experiencing it in a very different way. And as a white leader, I really want to shout out there that, like, I do not know everyone's experiences, and I have a lot of privilege in this space. I think taking time off was something that I did that was very privileged, and I'm happy to talk more about that, how it worked, how it doesn't work for the system. There are a number of foundations that support sabbaticals and taking time off, and there are a lot that don't. So there are a lot of justice issues inherent in this as well that are both personal and professional. So what do we do? I want to talk about this briefly, and then I want to really get to our conversation with Jay so we can talk about this more. The On-Ramps produced a report in response to the Center for Effective Philanthropy work where they talked to their own group of nonprofits of like, what can your organization offer to support mental and physical health? I do think it's interesting in here that sabbatical is listed as the highest. I will say that, according to my conversation with my friend in HR, sabbaticals can be helpful if they are structured right and if there are changes made in the organization, where we can also um, come back to something that is really different from what we stepped away from. Often the problems are not solved. We need to be able to approach things differently. Um, these are tools in organizations. I also just want to speak to like what we can do in our day-to-day practices, and going back again to this book Burnout that Emily and Amelia Nagoski wrote. And there is a wonderful, if you just Google it, it's on Spotify and probably other places too, interview that they did with Brene Brown. It's about an hour. I highly suggest that they talk all about the stress response and how, like, physiologically to get out of it. But, on a day-to-day basis, things that we can do are, express our boundaries at work, really stick to them, create them, know what they are, have the confidence and feel safe enough in our space to do that. And then I think physically too, it's social connection. So laughter is one of them, affection is one of them, like to get our bodies into that safe space, we have to convince them that we're safe. And then breathing and then physical activity are the things that like actually help jog our bodies out of this constant state of stress burnout. And I think that's important to remember too, is like these things that are listed are all things that we can do with our brains to make things better. But burnout is a body issue, first and foremost. And so it was important for me to go into my body, and it's important for everyone to go into their bodies to start to think about how to address it. As I mentioned, Beth Cantor talks a lot about burnout being an organizational issue. She just had a conversation with Nonprofit Quarterly about burnout, and she lists her framework for working with organizations and about how it's an organizational issue. And so she talks about these 5 things that organizations can do, which is process and culture change. So establishing boundaries, like looking at what you can do in your culture, feeling appreciated, feeling people getting along. I want to add in here, I'm sure she talks about this too. This is not in explicit in this framework, but I think belonging and inclusion are a huge part of this. And that is something actually that's talked about in some of these other reports too, about, again, if you don't feel like you belong or you're safe and have that psychological safety at your organization, that can be an issue too. But these are some process things that we can do to help. So just wrapping up here, I want to ask you what you think, and we can talk about this too. I will talk a little bit about what I have done as a result of that too. So I stepped back into the consulting space in 2023. I rebranded my organization, Plus Impact Partners, and that's because of the plus. Again, program design, leadership development. I work on insights, I do strategic planning. And then the thing that I am offering this year to clients, which is brand new, and it's because I feel pretty passionately about it, is this offer of sabbatical design. And that's both working with organizations to do that, but also individuals, people in the social impact space who have decided it is time for them to take a sabbatical and to take significant time off. And there are some different components that I see to sabbaticals that really are important. So I work with people to consider rest, to ask these questions at the beginning of like, how are you really feeling? I think a lot of us approach this idea of a sabbatical of like, what am I going to get done? I'm going to write that book that I always said I was going to write. I'm going to fulfill my goals. And I think that's all great. And I don't think that that is what is effective at the beginning of a time of sabbatical, especially if you're coming from a place of burnout. If you are trying to prevent burnout, that's a whole different story, and you can start in that place. But I think a lot of us, and I know this from my experience after being a development director in 2010 and taking time off, I slept for the first month. I thought I was going to get a lot done, and I really slept. And I thought, what is wrong with me? There was nothing wrong with me, it turns out. I was just tired. And so I think it's helpful to check in with our bodies first as we think about this. I want to mention one more thing as I stop sharing here and we get into our conversation, which is that part of my serotonin upticking is these two adorable kittens that I have behind me, and you might see them fighting on the couch. They love each other. Momo means they've decided that because I'm talking, they're going to go all around me. So just be aware, there are kittens who have entered the chat and they're here with us together. So thank you for letting me talk. And thanks, Jay, for providing all these links. I appreciate it. No, this is amazing. You were like Googling while I was talking. And
I
I'm happy to send over some
I
links
was
too.
trying to keep up. And there's a lot in there. So if you are here with us live and you don't know, and if you look in the
Thanks,
chat,
Dylan.
you'll see some links to some of the things that Cassie was referencing. I just thought they were all really fascinating. And those include the Burnout book, the Power of Time Off, a talk by Stefan Sagmeister. Let me see, the Sabbaticals for BIPOC Leaders, which is a wonderful PDF. How to link and a link to the Sustaining and Retaining Senior Leaders in the Social Sector report. And in fact, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
There's also a link to the interview with Beth Cantor from Nonprofit Quarterly. But one of the things that is always a challenge, it's a challenge for people to take time to be with us today, is
Yeah.
if I do this, I'm not doing something else. I'm not bringing enough money in. I'm not doing whatever it is I'm supposed to be doing. And I wonder if maybe some of the material in a report like that gives us some evidence for why we need to, as institutions, make sure that our teams have time off, that is available to them, and that it actually makes them more productive. I know that we shouldn't use productivity as the way to increase an argument for sabbaticals, but it seems like that's one thing that you can measure.
Yeah, and I think it is one thing you can measure. I think it's also helpful to let's reframe it just a little bit. Let's recast it a little bit where it's
Okay.
that, taking time off, significant time off, here's one kitten right here, is something that gets us back to our center. So instead of being like tops spinning out of control, I actually now personally feel like I'm in a position where I can, you know, have that compassion and be a good servant leader again. I am not in my own way. I'm not in my team's way. I'm not in my organization's way. I actually have the energy and the centeredness to be able to do good work. And I didn't have that before. And I think everybody knows inherently that that's true. So it's not necessarily about being more productive at the outside of taking time off. It's about coming back, I think, to, what drives a lot of us in the first place, stepping into this career. I want to address something else that you said earlier because this is the truth, and this is, I think, one of those things that makes us feel really uncomfortable. I think discomfort is what it takes to actually make change happen. And I just want to remind everyone, nobody ever died from being uncomfortable. That is a quote that I did not make up. It is one that is like one of my mantras now. Like, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm not going to die. And that is how I'm changing. And what you said, Jay, is you said, in order to do these things, there's something else that doesn't get done. And that that's the truth. And it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for organizations. It's uncomfortable for those of us who want to put, and I'm part of this, want to put 12 things on my to-do list and then have to take them off and, feel like, and this is my other mantra, I'm doing it wrong if I have to take it off. Um, and
Where
it's
does
true.
that come from? Where, I mean, because maybe not everybody suffers from it, but I do. And you just talked about suffering from it, at least before you went through this process. What is that about? It's
Okay.
not
Well,
all because
first
of
of all,
Henry Ford, I hope.
no, well, no, I mean, the reason I talked about Henry, I mean, right? The reason I talked about Henry Ford is I do think a lot of it is just, it's the water we swim in. that we can't see. So I think it is important to remember again that we are part of society, we are part of history.
Mhm.
So, we have this, no, it's true. We have this individualistic culture. And I would like to give a shout out to, the movement leaders out there that remind me over and over again, like we are part of history. We are part of a continuing conversation. We are not the individuals. We are part of this community because I think it's helpful to both own that this is where this comes from. It's part of our culture. And then also to be able to, once we acknowledge it, start to think about how do I want to change the system in a way that works for more people? And that is social justice work. You also said that I don't maybe have the I'm doing it wrong thing. I would like to share with you that the I'm doing it wrong mantra is something that happens for me every day of my life. And multiple, it happens like 10 minutes after I wake up. What works now after the work that I have done and bringing in some more of this, I would say like somatic physical balance to my life, which has been really key, is that it's not as loud and I'm able to bear it and to understand that it's not really true. And that's been a lot of hard work and it's continues to be hard. And some days it gets the better of me, right? And some days it doesn't. So it's an ongoing, I would say, meditation on this. Where does it come from? I wish I could tell you. I mean, I think a lot of it is, like the drive to, I went to it. Shout out to my high school. I went to a high school called the College Preparatory School. There, we had one job was to go to college, so it's been part of my work and the way that I've showed up in the world for my whole life.
There's a lot to unpack in all of this, but I want to be mindful that there are people here with us. And first of all, that if you have questions or comments, we definitely want to hear them
Yeah.
if you're here with us live. But also, I wouldn't mind taking a temperature of those who are with us right now to find out if they have or are experiencing burnout, if they'd like to talk about that, but also whether or not they have ever given themselves time off. And because what you described, uh, Cassie, especially not trying to do everything immediately upon taking time off, is something that I know I've struggled with. The idea that
Yeah.
you said you slept through the first month, and I can imagine myself doing the same thing if I gave myself that time. But I would probably enter into it thinking, that's it. I'm going to produce these 50,000 things that I haven't gotten around to because I was working for someone. So if again, if anybody has comments about whether or not you're in this position of burnout or whether you've given yourself space, we would love to hear that. When you did initially give yourself time off, Cassie, and then you realized you just needed to give yourself some rest, was that a reset to where you were right before, let's say, the last major thing occupying you professionally? Or was that to give yourself an opportunity to become the new person you were at that point in your life?
I mean, I think all of our experiences turn us into slightly new people. So, and I think that's an open question. I will share that this burnout was so physical for me that, the way that I talk about it with people is it's like, when your phone, um, when your phone overheats in the sun, this is what mine does. And it turns off and it won't let you use it. It'll be like, I'm sorry, I need to actually cool down before you can use me. That is what it felt like happened to my brain. I also want to put in here, and I am of that age that there was a piece related to perimenopause that I did not realize had played into this. And I think it's important to talk about that out loud. Hormonal changes are a real issue for a lot of us out here. I think men and women both need to be aware of it. So, I think there were a lot of things playing into this, but yeah, my brain just really stopped working. And so I had a real moment, Jay, where I had to ask myself this tough question, which is like, can I ever go back and work in front of a desk again? I mean, the meme where it's like,
Mhm.
take 20 seconds and look away from your computer, take 20 years and go run off in the forest. And that is where I was. And especially when then I decided to do something that I had wanted to do for a long time. And I'll just say it came up after I had tried to go on a Zoom call about 3 months into my break to talk to a potential client. And I had a panic attack during the Zoom call that I could feel coming on, and then after the Zoom call, I had to lie down. I had to go out for a walk, and then I had to lie down on my couch, and it was during that I really said to myself, "I need to take another 3 months off. This is not great." And I decided I needed to do this is very intuitive of me, but, since have learned, like, this is part of reset of the stress cycle, I decided to take a month and just change my situation and go invest in doing this yoga teacher training, which is something I'd always wanted to do sort of as a lark and, had never had the time to do. And that ended up being a really foundational experience in a lot of ways. And so I would say that at the end of the day, I came back wanting to step back into consulting. I love my clients. I really love supporting the work in the sector. It is a way that I see that I can be service to leaders from all different backgrounds, is to help them succeed in what they're trying to do. But it was not clear that that was going to be what happened for I would say a really long time, actually. Um, and I feel changed in the way that I'm doing it. I want to say too, like, there's a question in the chat here that sort of
Mhm.
speaks to that, which is like, how do you offer all these great benefits and also ensure your clients you serve are also prioritized? And that's I think related to what you were saying. And it's like, how do we make sure our beneficiaries are also prioritized? And I think it's twofold. So you have to serve your clients with your boundaries in place. And what that means for me now is it means there are some projects I'm not going to do. It means that there are boundaries that I have to set up with clients, right? And sure, I think boundaries and they're flexible. So an executive director that my partner and I were working with 6 months ago, had an issue come up with her staff that needed immediate attention, and they can be really tricky. And I did give it that immediate attention. When I do that, I then try to recognize that that's not only been a disruption, to my space, but it's also meant that I can then have to change something else, right? So maybe I spent 4 hours talking to her that day, and this is what my partner was actually the person who talked to her, and what he did is he's like, "I can't work on this other thing because I spent all this time working with her." And I think that was really, we were very candid with each other. I think it was really important for Tim to recognize. And it meant that I then was like, okay, I can step in and do that. So I think it's really also important to know, and this is hard at nonprofits because often there's one of us doing our job, and in small organizations too. And I think that's partly what contributes to the burnout. But you either have to do less or you have to rely on, others to really be part of a community and to like take, pick and choose and do things. And maybe it means that I make less money. I mean, this is sort of the reality that I'm coming to now is, do I financially have to, give in and work with fewer clients? And these are open questions for me. I don't have a good answer. I do try and work with clients now who also have, in the same way that I look at, do my clients have leadership that, I think is of community, and, do they have, uh, DEI statements in place? Are they really like walking the walk? For me, it's also now important to say, are they also looking at mental health and wellness and balance, right? Um, yeah, that's part of it too. Anyway, I see a lot of things
There,
happening in the chat here. So
there are, and I want to read a couple of them, and
yeah,
I won't read names just
yeah,
because I think it's in this context it's important not to do that. But I do want to honor these comments. But before I do that, I want to say one thing about what you just said, which is that a lot of small organizations, and I'm sure you're right, where we feel the weight of our responsibility because we're the only one doing it. But there's
yeah.
also a certain amount of Jean Valjean in that, like, oh, if I don't lift this big thing off the guy, then everybody, but then to be fair, in
Is
large
it time for the
organizations,
revolution? Are we all going to take to the streets and sing? I mean, maybe we should
maybe
actually.
we
I think a
should.
lot of us might feel that way.
But in larger organizations, you might feel like no matter what your role is, even though there are a lot of people, that again, it's almost like a factory. Even if you have a pretty sizable title, responsibility, maybe even compensation, because again, if you don't do what your cog in the wheel does, then the whole machine stops functioning. So I just want to make sure I gave a shout out to the people in larger places that we feel your pain too. There were comments here. Let me see. One person said, I'm on an 8-month break right now, but not sure they fully recovered from burnout yet. Another
Yeah.
who said they didn't give themselves time off, but 13 months of unemployment over a decade turned out to be a surprising blessing because it gave them time to focus on life instead of work. And then one person who said they had to retire earlier because their body rebelled, like you were
Yeah.
talking about earlier, Cassie, and they're still recovering from burnout, and it's been a slow year and a half. But they would not have been able to do this without reaching their Social Security age. And I want to take that just as a departure point for a moment, because you highlighted something which is very real, which is there are inequities in society, and some of those will play out in different ways: ethnicity, gender, age, etc. We can't tackle them all in this one session today, but inevitably it means some people might find it difficult to take time off, however whatever form that takes, not just because of their responsibilities and their commitment and their feelings of obligation, but also because they just can't afford it. So what is the argument, not the argument, what's the conversation like to ensure that people, whoever they are, wherever they come from, whatever their resources, can give themselves time to be who they are?
Yeah, it's a real challenge right now, and it is a justice issue. I mean, I will say in the sector, I was just trying to put some stuff in the chat and my cut and paste wasn't working, so I'll try and do that again. There are about, and Google AI, Gemini will tell you this, there are about 15 funders who do fund sabbaticals. The Durfee Foundation has been doing it for about 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
and they have both a guide that they have a lot of great research out there, DURFEE out of Los Angeles. And part of what they have is both for organizations for how to create sabbaticals for employees, as well as for funders on why they should fund employees. I will share with folks, these are not, by the way, there's no big picture solution, unfortunately. They're just, I think, bits and pieces now as this becomes more of a groundswell and more of a conversation. There are some funders who are doing it. I just remember so vividly talking to a fellow funder when I was working for a foundation who said that the way that they make decisions to give to their nonprofits is by what they're hearing from their nonprofits. So, never discount that one of your funders or one of your donors might not actually be on this path with you and might actually want to help you recreate something in your organization that helps provide for staff sabbaticals, and or taking time off. I will admit and say, and this is true, I read something like 60+% of people who take time off self-fund. I spent a fair chunk of my savings. In fact, I'll be honest, I spent everything that wasn't put away from retirement, I spent all of my savings. And, I think this has been an unwinding of me and my own expectations too. Um, we're sort of told, okay, save for retirement and save for a house. We have sort of a list of things that we're save for vacation, save for philanthropy, which I think is important too. And so to admit to myself that I was going to spend my savings, and I had a good friend who actually said to me when I was fretting about this, she was like, "This is what your savings are for. This is an emergency." And that really helped reshape it for me personally. It might not for everyone. I live by myself. I do not have children. I do not have a mortgage. So I really, really want to say out loud, like, I understand the privilege of being able to use my savings for this time. And also say that, it was a reshaping for me that I felt very guilty about. Am I going to spend this money to do this?
Right.
Um,
Well, when you talked about those foundations, I think that's a helpful note, and I don't know if there's a
yeah,
way to paste that in, but
let me
I
see if I
also
can. Yeah.
want to point out again that it seems like there's a shout out here to organizations to make a part of their whole package of compensation and benefits opportunities for people to take time, because from one angle that just makes for happier employees, it increases retention. That also could lead to greater productivity when they are with you. It's sort of like we found with the pandemic that many people working outside an office ended up becoming more productive. It's not always necessarily 8 to 4 or 9 to 5. It may be different hours, but the work gets done. But it may be happier people make for more successful organizations. But I wanted to ask you this from another perspective, just
Yeah.
thinking about it from the leadership point of view, and particularly the arguments we make for that kind of change, institutional change. And that is, how is it that have you found, both personally and others you've talked to about this, have you found that taking this kind of break actually makes us more productive in our lives? Sure, at the office, but just in general, that we come back to it with kind of renewed enthusiasm. And so therefore, that's one more reason for organizations to build this into the package.
I mean, I love that we're trying to make the argument that fits within the system.
I know. I know.
You know, we are,
Yeah,
because, and I understand you're like, okay, how can people take this and bring this back to their boss or bring it to the board and
that,
say we should
yes.
do this,
Yeah. It's a
right?
little transparent, but
It's,
yes.
well, and I get it. Like, we really want to say this is going to make us more productive. I mean, the good news is there is definitely evidence out there that time off does make people more productive. There's a whole movement now around the 4-day work week. And there's some really good evidence that for people who have tried this, companies that have tried this, are going to keep it because, in fact, working, shorter days, like I think there was another article that I saw that talked about trying a 6-hour day, and that was in a medical setting. And both of those, sort of experiments, I think what's happening right now is there are these pilots for these programs have been wildly successful. People are ready. And in fact, I think there are a couple of I'm forgetting his name right now, but like there have been a couple of social scientists over the years who have said like when we reach this part of the 21st century when we have all these productivity tools, we should be working less. Like we envision that people are going to be working less. One of the things that's a real opportunity is, when we look at, and I was thinking about this, if we look at bringing AI in, and there's going to be an uphill,
Mhm.
struggle on this one too to learn it, but at the same time, bringing it in, when we work less because we bring in this new productivity tool, why do we have to replace it with something new? And I think that that's going to take an active conversation and some real candor from everyone at organizations. So I will say, and this is me putting on my strategist consulting hat. I think when I do strategic planning or program design work with clients, I think part of a strategic planning process can be that time and space to have conversations around what are our priorities. And I think that, talking about how do we build sustainability into the organization used to be code for fundraising. We all know it as fundraisers on this chat, like that's code for fundraising. I think being really conscious and because it's become more of a national conversation, international conversation, saying, well, sustainability also means our health and wellness as organizations and as teams. And you can take this 95% stat and bring that right back to your board and for the conversation, and then build that into one of your strategic priorities. So I think it's going to take some time, unfortunately, to like have this sector move in this direction. But I do think it's possible by using some of the tools that we, have traditionally used to change our own systems, which is, the strategic planning process, or, how do we design a program that fosters wellness for individuals? How do we fund that? Asking those questions and really institutionalizing them. Did that answer your question? That's me just getting up on my
Yeah,
soapbox.
no, no, it definitely does. And in fact, I was thinking about this also from the perspective of how we're always trying to measure maybe the wrong things, or at least the old things. So if it's about growth, I'm thinking about Henry Ford now, right? Producing the number of cars on the
Yeah.
assembly line, that was probably important for auto manufacturing to do. But today, if we're still measuring success by how many hours a person works, whether it's ourselves or our employees, that's kind of a strange way of thinking about things when not only is AI, in theory, going to be today's washing machine, right? The idea being that we don't spend our whole day doing the laundry, that we use the machine to free us up from it. But the danger, of course, in misapplication of new technologies and new ways of thinking is that we just, as you just said, we replace the time we saved with new busy tasks because we keep measuring the wrong things, namely growth of income, growth of savings, growth of the house square footage, growth, all these things, which I don't know how relevant they are in this century.
Yeah, I don't, I know it's changing. And, as you talk, I want to maybe point out something that might be an argument too. So if we take productivity as being the final measure out there, I mean, something we can measure is staff retention. And I think especially in the development field and how much money it costs to replace a staff person, especially from a small organization. And
Mhm.
so that in itself can be a compelling argument for a board too, of like, this is what our staff turnover has looked like, or this is what we're hearing from our employees, and it will hamstring us if we have to go through and find this out. I will also say, and this is something I know from the development consulting work that I've done, donors notice when your development director leaves, right? Or if that person leaves and is replaced by someone else, a
Oh,
year
yes.
later, they notice over time, oh, I had this relationship with someone and they're gone. Oh, the next person is gone. what's wrong with the organization that I'm talking to someone different every year? I literally heard that from a donor once. So, I think organizations can't necessarily afford to continue to have in place cultures that really are pushing us to our limits, right? And we all want to do the good work, but the good work is it's a real savior mentality to say, I have to do as much as I can possibly do. And I think if the pandemic taught me anything, and maybe other people too, is we all went in there with guns blazing, those of us in helping professions of like, let's do it, like let's change it. And then it kept going. The pressures of how things have changed politically and how separate we've got. These are ongoing things. And, I think one of the issues with being so inundated with information all the time is we feel like we have to solve them all now. It's a long game, put on your marathon shoes, take time out to smell the flowers and then come back. I mean, and again, I just want to give a shout out again to movement leaders, and thank you, Eleanor, for putting this in the chat here too. The national movement to support the entire nonprofit workforce by changing hearts and minds. I did not know about this. This is really amazing, but like I want to put this out there for movement leaders and especially leaders of color have been saying this for years and decades. And just if you go back and look at the history, this is something that inspired me to come back into the sector too. Is I was like, you know what? There have been activists working for centuries on dismantling racial inequities in this country. Who am I to say that like I'm burned out and I, can't get better and just join the fight again? I just have had to do it in a way that makes sense for my brain and body, and it'll be an ongoing struggle. Before we end, I really want to just give a acknowledgement out here. To what I'm seeing in the chat too, where a lot of people, and thank you for being so vulnerable, are saying out loud that they're feeling burned out and they are feeling like they don't have it. Like, how can I take time off? And I don't have the money to do so. And I really feel that deeply. So I just also want to say here, it may not be time off that is, your organization might not be ready to change, or you might not be able to take time off for whatever financial or logistical reason. And so I think then, it's going to be different for everyone. So I think asking those uncomfortable questions of like, how can I not feel like a failure for having a very normal human reaction and like maybe needing to do less or to change the way I'm working or to like really spend a weekend and take a look at like what is how am I not feeling motivated or engaged in my job? Is there a way I can do more things that make me feel engaged and less of the stuff that doesn't make me feel engaged? And these are not easy questions and they're not immediate questions to solve. So, I just want to encourage people, if this conversation is like your first step in thinking about this or your last step in thinking about something you've been thinking about for a long time, you know, um, you're doing one thing today that is helping you think about creating a solution for something that you know isn't working for your mind and your body. And tomorrow you'll do the next thing, and the next day you'll do the next thing, and some things will work and they won't. So it's just like one step at a time, like everything else.
Yeah. I know we do have a few more minutes, so
Yeah.
questions, please, or comments. We'd love them both. But before we do that, and I have a final question for you, I want to let folks know that if you're here with us in real time, next Tuesday, we have a session that's talking about harnessing AI for nonprofit success. And we'll definitely need to ask Amy, who is also, Amy Newman is as the author, and she's also led a very, very interesting career, very people-centered, whether or not that's one of the considerations about what is the definition of success for the nonprofit sector as we use AI. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's going to be coming up on Tuesday, the October 29th, 2024 at 1 p.m. And then on October 31st, Halloween, we have our annual special. This year, it's called The Dark Side of Doing Good Nonprofit Disasters and How to Avoid Them. So
Ooh.
if you have any scary stories, contact me. I collect them. They go back 20 years. I'd really love some fresh ones about what people should and should not be doing, fundraising, nonprofits, and general leadership. If you have a story to tell or you've heard of one that you think would be fun to discuss, whether it's funny or horrifying, contact me. It's jay@donorsearch.net, or you can reach me through LinkedIn. And that's a good place to ask Cassie, how can people reach out to you if they want to reach out to you after today and learn more about your journey and what you do?
Yeah, I mean, people are welcome to email me. I can put my or I'll just put my email in the chat.
Okay.
I
And
like
then
talking to
I'll, shall I read it out loud too, also for the recording? Is that okay?
Sure, because now I'm having a menopause moment. I'm like, I can't remember what it is. It's plus impact factors. It's real, folks. It's real. So, um,
Yes,
so
yes, I
please do
understand.
email me. I'm happy to chat about this. I'm really interested in this ongoing conversation. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I would welcome continuing a conversation with anyone too, and being in community with you as we think about it. Thanks, Jay.
And that's Cassie at plusimpactpartners.org
That's
for
it.
the listeners. And also you can just look at plusimpactpartners.org for more information on the company. And Jack, our producer, has put that in the chat as well.
Thank
So you can
you.
just click any of those links, but don't go away, because this is the final question, which is, you've been through this journey. You've told us all about it. You didn't necessarily plan for what you're going to do when you actually took that time off, which I loved. And then you came out the other side of that. So do you still feel the rejuvenation? And what do you imagine as you go forward? Do you imagine that this is going to become a cyclical thing where you give yourself this time to unwind and revisit the new you every few months or years? What is the role now for this kind of rejuvenative process as you look forward?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I do think of it as being cyclical now. I've done it twice in my career. It's been tremendously helpful. So, and it also is helpful for me to think, okay, what do I want to do for the next 8 to 10 years, with the understanding that I probably will take a break at that point too, right? So I think it's just reframe the way that I think about how I'm going to approach my career going forward. What I am taking forward from it is trying to work differently for myself, really, and that is an ongoing learning process, I have to tell you. And also some of the decisions I'm making about, do I want to go in-house with an organization, or do I want to, be a consultant where I have some flexibility? And those are, different questions I ask myself. If I went in-house with an organization, how would I want the culture to look? How could I help create culture around that too? So I think it's about working differently, what I'm prioritizing. And then I just wanna say too, I think, I did not have planned what I was gonna do. I was feeling really uncomfortable. It's part of the reason why I wanted to create this, sabbatical design program, because I don't think that there's really yet a container for people to be able to be vulnerable and go through their sabbaticals, and I certainly needed it. And I leaned on a lot of different people, in a lot of different conversations, and really did my own adventure, and I think it can be easier. So I just wanna be one of the people in the movement that is helping to make it more normalized and to make it easier for folks, especially in the social sector, to do this work.
Thank you for all this, Cassie. Really do
Yeah.
appreciate it. And thank you to all of you who are with us live. Thanks to, of course, to those who are watching or listening to this later. And I hope you'll share it with your colleagues so we can all have this discussion. It won't be just us sitting alone individually wondering how we can breathe tomorrow, but we'll all have a plan
Yeah.
for finding the space to do it. It's important to collectively as well as individually. And I want to encourage all of you to let us know what gives you some peace through this series. That's the whole reason why we're doing this stuff.
Yeah.
We've been doing it now 9 years. And the reason we do it is because we've needed a way to communicate with one another, and webinars were one format to do that, especially post-pandemic. So you're going to see a survey when you close out today. Please fill it out. Let us know what you want to see in here. Be as specific as you can. We really want to program, especially this next year, the 10th season, around your needs and interests. So please do fill that out. We'd love it. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, take care. And I really mean take care. Thank you, Cassie.
Thanks, Jay.